to reach this point. And I must say I have a very clear recollection that when you announced that you would be joining the new government, you said you had, and I quote, a commitment from Francis Fitzgerald and from the government that the UN CRPD would be ratified within 6 months. They were your words at the time. It is now a full 2 years since that election. 2 additional unnecessary years where Ireland continued to not be a society of equals for people with disabilities. This unfair treatment of disabled people, of course, is not unique to Ireland, but is a deep-rooted problem on a global scale. 12 years ago, the United Nations agreed on global action in the form of the UN Convention. On the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Ireland took a leadership position when it signed the convention on the first day possible in 2007. But the state has regressed in the intervening years. The recession and austerity measures introduced since the signing of the convention have been especially and disproportionately severe in the impact on people with disabilities and on their families. This was a very short-sighted approach, as well as being completely unjust. Long-term problems related to a deterioration in conditions and a reduction in the quality of life of people with disabilities, and they are simply being stored up for the future. Ultimately, these problems will impact negatively both on individual lives and on public spending in the future, especially where disabled children and young people are affected. Both from the perspective of basic fairness and also financial considerations, it makes more sense to invest in services now rather than dealing with more complex and costly conditions down the road. The 13% of Irish people who have disabilities and or mental health difficulties are at significantly greater risk than non-disabled people of experiencing poverty, social exclusion, unemployment, and a lack of opportunity for education, training, and retraining. It is inexcusable that a key piece of legislation that will address these issues has been delayed and sidelined for so long. It speaks volumes about this government's attitude to the most marginalised in Irish society. Despite ratification, I'm concerned that a number of key policy issues are being sidestepped. The Centre for Disability Law and Policy at NUI Galway has highlighted a number of these issues. Firstly, there are a number of declarations and reservations being made as part of this process. It is highly disappointing that people with disabilities in Ireland will not have the full protection of Article 12 on legal capacity in decision-making, Article 14 on the deprivation of liberty, and Article 27 on employment. Ideally, these reservations would not be necessary, but if they are to be included, it is incumbent on the Minister to ensure they are not unduly onerous. Secondly, the Disability Miscellaneous Provisions Bill of 2016, which is earmarked as necessary for the ratification of the Convention, has still not progressed through committee stage in the Dáil. It was last debated over a year ago. This bill will see important changes to Ireland's laws, including on voting, membership of juries, and issues relating to the deprivation of liberty. Thirdly, Article 33 of the Convention requires that people with disabilities are involved in the monitoring processes for the implementation of the Convention. While the Government has identified the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission and the National Disability Authority in the roadmap to ratification and the Disability Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2016 as part of the monitoring mechanism for the Convention, it has not outlined how people with disabilities will be involved in this process. The ratification of the Convention is, in reality, only the beginning of the process. The Convention maps out a very broad-ranging set of requirements, along with measurable implementation mechanisms. These aim at improving the lives of people with disabilities across the whole of society, including economic life, social life, political involvement, independent living in the community, transport, housing, and many other policy areas. These plans were developed in consultation with the global movement of people with disabilities, including Irish representatives. I would ask the Minister to produce a detailed, grounded plan for the establishment of the promised Advisory Committee of Disabled People to support the IHREC in monitoring the Convention. This committee must be established, resourced, and given training and other supports. It is imperative that this committee be representative of all persons with a disability and comprised of a majority of disabled people, as called for by Inclusion Ireland. In addition, the Minister must publish a timetable for all key legislative reform that is included in the roadmap to ratification, with specific deadlines for all outstanding matters. There can be no more slippage in terms of timeframes. Inclusion Ireland have also called for a commitment from government that all information relating to and consultations pertaining to the Convention are produced in accessible and easy-to-read format. They've also called that advice from the AG would be sought and published into the conflict between private property rights and reasonable accommodation. They called for a commitment to establish the Decision Support Service in this current year. An explanation and, if necessary, an apology made for the 11-year delay in ratification of the Convention, and we haven't had that explanation or apology, Minister. Adequate consultation on deprivation of liberty safeguards should take place, and continued commitment to non-institutionalised models of living and community inclusion should be made. While the Convention is aspirational, it can act as a roadmap for some very practical steps the Minister could take that would have a real impact on the lives of people with disabilities in the short term. We in the Social Democrats have previously called on the Minister to take a number of key actions. Firstly, to ensure that personal assistance and other individualised social care services are restored and improved so that the policy of independent living can be fully honoured. Secondly, to end barriers to disabled people entering or remaining within the paid workforce, such as inadequate educational provision, continuing benefit traps, discriminatory access rules and attitudes. Thirdly, recognise the extra costs of living for disabled people and helping them to stay out of poverty through a specific cost of living payment, as has been promised but not delivered. These are actions that the Minister could commit to here and now to make a real impact on the lives of people with disabilities and to give some real practical weight to the ratification here today. Finally, I note in a roadmap to ratification report from the Department of Justice in 2015 that an explicit commitment was given to the Irish state signing the optional protocol that would allow for individual complaints to be submitted directly to the CRPD committee by individuals or groups of individuals or by a third party on behalf of individuals and groups of individuals alleging that their rights have been violated under the CRPD. The document states that, quote, "We intend to sign and ratify the original protocol to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities at the same time as the Convention itself is being ratified." I'd ask the Minister, therefore, to provide an assurance that this protocol will be signed as part of the ratification process to ensure maximum protection for people with disabilities. And finally, I just want to pay tribute to all of those individuals and organisations who have been campaigning in this area for many years, looking for the ratification to take place. And I want to particularly note the very, very significant contribution
We've just saved half a minute. We've just saved half a minute, so I'm afraid there'll be some deputies, but don't point your finger at me. Deputy Peter Fitzpatrick, and I understand there's a constituent